If you're the kind of person who can't stop replaying lies and half-truths in your head, this is for you. If you don't fix this, you'll keep living in suspicion and wrecking your own peace. Today I'll show you how to trust again after being lied to, with one rule and one line you can actually use. We'll test it in a real Friday night conversation at the kitchen table where you'd normally lose it. If that sounds like something you need, stay with me. You're standing in the kitchen late at night, staring at a message they just sent, one of those carefully crafted paragraphs that tries to explain everything. Your chest tightens because you've heard these explanations before, and you can already feel your mind lining them up against old conversations. You scroll back through past texts, comparing timelines, catching small contradictions, wanting to believe them so badly it almost hurts, while the part of you that still feels burned refuses to go quiet. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never say out loud: trust doesn't usually shatter in a single dramatic moment. It cracks slowly, conversation by conversation, in the details they conveniently forget to mention, in the stories that don't fully line up, in the promises that sound right but never quite land in reality. And here's the question you might be stuck on right now: how do you rebuild something as invisible and intimate as trust when you can't even tell what's real and what's performance anymore? The pain shows up everywhere. You catch yourself listening more for what they're not saying than for what they are. You replay arguments in the shower and in the car, trying to spot where the lie started. You zoom in on their texts, their tone, and the time it took them to reply. You look at their social media and wonder who else knows a version of the story you still don't have. You start to feel like an investigator instead of a partner, and that role is exhausting. The worst part is what it does to you on the inside. Your sleep gets lighter, your body stays tense, and a part of you starts to believe that you're foolish for trusting anyone at all. If nothing changes, you don't just lose trust in them, you slowly lose trust in your own judgment. Right now, you might be caught between two hard options that both feel wrong. On one side, walking away feels like you're throwing away all the time, energy, and memories you've already invested. On the other hand, staying without any structure feels like volunteering to be hurt again and calling it loyalty. So you hover in the middle, not really in, not really out, saying things like "we'll see" while your mind keeps running worst-case scenarios. You might even notice yourself changing in ways you don't like, checking their phone when they're in the shower, stalking old posts, asking too many questions not because you're curious, but because you're afraid. This in-between place has a cost. It drains your days because every small interaction turns into a secret test. It drains your work because you're distracted and emotionally tired. It drains your self-respect because you start breaking your own standards to keep the peace, telling yourself, "It's not that bad," even though your body knows it is. If you stay here too long, you risk building a life around managing someone else's honesty instead of building a life around your own values. That's the real danger, becoming someone you don't recognize just to keep a connection you're not sure you even trust. So this isn't about becoming chill no matter what someone does. It's about becoming clear. Clear on what you need to see, clear on how you'll respond if those needs aren't met, and clear on the kind of partner you refuse to keep pretending to be okay with. You can't control whether someone chooses honesty, but you can control whether you keep giving them unlimited access to your time, your attention, and your emotional energy. What we're going to do together in this lesson is not about pretending everything is fine or forcing forgiveness before you're ready. By the end, you'll know the difference between blind trust and earned trust, so you stop handing out second chances on credit. You'll be able to set clear, practical conditions for rebuilding, specific changes in behavior, communication, and accountability instead of vague promises. And you'll have tools to calm your nervous system so you're not living in constant suspicion, stuck refreshing their story in your head like an endless feed you can't turn off. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. First, we're going to break the myth that time heals trust and show you why time alone doesn't fix broken integrity, only consistent behavior does. Next, we'll look at the difference between protecting yourself wisely and building walls so high that nobody, including you, can breathe. Then we'll walk through how to create your own simple trust framework so you know what has to change, what you will no longer tolerate, and what you're still open to. After that, we'll talk about how to hold your boundaries when guilt, pressure, or loneliness try to make you lower your standards. Finally, we'll bring it all together so you can leave with a small set of clear moves you can actually use in real conversations, not just ideas that sound good when you're calm. In a bit, we'll step into a Friday night moment where they're sitting across from you at the table, trying to explain what really happened one more time, and you'll see exactly how one small shift in how you respond changes the entire direction of that conversation and your night. You stop rebuilding trust the moment you skip clarity. That's the claim for this part, and it matters more than people realize. When someone lies to you or hides something, your instinct is usually to demand reassurance instead of clarity. You want them to tell you it won't happen again, to promise transparency, to swear they understand your pain. But reassurance doesn't rebuild anything. Clear expectations do. Without clarity, you will keep circling the same arguments, asking the same questions, and living in the same uneasy state where you're never fully convinced and they're always confused about what you actually need. And here's the stake: if you never learn to get specific about what trust requires, you end up living in a relationship held together by vague hopes rather than grounded behavior, and that always collapses under pressure. Clarity works because your brain is trying to protect you. When trust breaks, your mind starts running protective scans, looking for patterns, checking for inconsistencies, trying to catch anything that could hurt you again. It feels like paranoia, but it's actually your nervous system trying to keep you safe. When you set clear expectations, specific behaviors, timelines, boundaries, you give your mind something solid to rest on. Instead of wondering whether they're being honest today, you look at whether the agreed behavior is happening. That shift lowers anxiety because you move from guessing intentions to observing actions. And this is how a calmer, more grounded version of you responds. You stop reacting to what scares you and start responding to what's real. This is what Marcus meant in Meditations when he talked about choosing your response rather than being dragged by emotion. Clarity anchors you so you're not tossed around by old fears. Here's your exact line for this part, something steady you can say without drama or accusation. If we're rebuilding trust, I need clear agreements, specific actions we both understand and follow. That sentence pulls the conversation out of emotion and into structure. It tells the other person you're not asking for perfection, you're asking for clarity. And clarity is measurable. It gives both of you something to point to instead of fighting about interpretations or tone. Picture this in an everyday North American moment. You're sitting at a small cafe with them on a Saturday morning. The coffee's getting cold because you've spent the last 20 minutes talking in circles about what went wrong last week. You hear them say, "I told you everything," and your stomach flips because you've heard that line before. The old version of you would take the bait, pushing harder, asking for timelines, replaying arguments, escalating things until both of you are exhausted. But today you try something different. You take a slow breath, let your shoulders drop a little, and use the line you practiced. If we're rebuilding trust, I need clear agreements, specific actions we both understand and follow. They lean back, a little thrown off, because you're not attacking and you're not begging. You're being specific. They ask, "Okay, what do you mean?" And for the first time, the conversation shifts. Instead of defending themselves, they're listening. Instead of listing what they didn't do wrong, they're asking what needs to be done right. The tone softens. The pressure drops. You've changed the entire direction of the moment with one clear sentence. Your tiny action for today is simple and doable. Write down one trust expectation that is specific, observable, and not dependent on guessing their intentions. Something like, "We check in before major schedule changes," or "We don't hide communication that directly affects the relationship." One line only. You're not building a full contract. You're choosing one measurable anchor you can use to calm your mind when doubts rise. Before you move on, take a slow moment here. Take one long breath in through your nose, hold it for a second, and let it out gently. Then say this line out loud once, just so you hear yourself claim it, if we're rebuilding trust, I need clear agreements. Say it again, slower this time, so your body absorbs the idea instead of rushing past it. You're practicing clarity, not conflict. You're practicing steadiness, not pressure. Hold on to this line, because when you face that Friday night moment later in this lesson, the one where the conversation could easily spiral again, this is the exact sentence that gives you the ground you stand on. You can't rebuild trust if you keep reacting to the first wave of emotion instead of the actual situation. This is the shift most people never make. After someone lies to you, every new conversation feels charged, like any small detail could be the next red flag. Your body tightens before the words even land. And here's the danger: if you keep responding to the fear instead of the facts, you'll end up overcorrecting, accusing too quickly, shutting down too early, or pulling away in ways that sabotage the very clarity you're trying to create. That's the micro-stakes here. If you never learn to slow your first reaction, you'll confuse old pain with current behavior, and the relationship will stay stuck in a loop where the past keeps interrupting the present. This works the way it does because your brain is wired for threat detection. When trust has been broken, even once, your nervous system becomes quicker to jump, tighter in the chest, faster to assume danger. You might think you're being dramatic, but you're actually experiencing a biological response. The Stoics understood this long before neuroscience. Epictetus talked about how your first impressions are automatic, but your judgment about them is optional. When you pause, you give yourself a moment to let your body be upset without letting the upset make your decision. It's a separation between the immediate wave and the thoughtful response underneath. And this is where you start becoming the calmer version of yourself, the version that isn't held hostage by adrenaline or by the old fear of being blindsided again. Here's your exact microscript for this part, something steady you can say in real time. Give me a moment, my reaction is loud, but I want to respond clearly. This one line does three things at once. It slows down the situation, it signals that you're trying to stay grounded, and it lets the other person know you're choosing clarity over accusation. It also buys your nervous system a little space to settle. You're not avoiding the conversation. You're approaching it with control instead of panic. Imagine this in a real North American moment. You're in your car outside their place after a long day, and they send a text saying they forgot to tell you about a plan they made with someone you don't quite trust yet. Your chest tightens. Your mind jumps to old patterns. The old version of you would fire back immediately, sending a long message that mixes fear, sarcasm, accusation, and anger, something you'd regret the second you hit send. Instead, you let your phone stay in your hand, but you don't type yet. You take a slow breath. You feel your shoulders drop a little. Then you text the line, "Give me a moment, my reaction is loud, but I want to respond clearly." They reply, "Okay, take your time." For once, the conversation doesn't explode. You haven't said you're fine. You haven't ignored the problem. You've given yourself space to figure out what's actually bothering you instead of attacking out of panic. When you finally do respond, it's calm, direct, and about the current issue, not every past wound. And because you didn't escalate, you both stay in the conversation instead of retreating into silence or defensiveness. Your tiny action for today is simple. Choose one situation from the last week where you reacted too fast, and write a short replacement sentence you wish you'd used instead. It doesn't need to be poetic or perfect. It just needs to give you space. Something like, "Hold on, I need a moment," or "I want to understand before I jump to conclusions." One line. That's it. You're not trying to rewrite history. You're training your body to choose a slower, clearer response in the future. This is practice, not self-blame. Take a slow practice moment with me here. Breathe in gently. Hold for 2 seconds. Let it out slowly. Now say the script quietly to yourself. My reaction is loud, but I want to respond clearly. Say it once more, slower this time, almost like you're teaching your nervous system something new. Feel what happens when you say it without rushing. You might notice your chest loosening just a bit. That's your body learning a different pattern. Something important happens when you slow your initial reaction. You stop confusing intensity with truth. Not every surge of fear is a sign you're being deceived again. Not every tight feeling in your stomach is a new red flag. Sometimes it's just a residue of the past trying to protect you. When you pause, you give yourself the power to verify reality before reacting to it. That's how trust gets rebuilt, not by ignoring fear, but by not letting fear drive the car. And hold on to this slowing down skill, because later, especially in that Friday night moment when emotions are running high, you're going to see exactly how one calm pause prevents the conversation from turning into another argument you both regret. This small shift is what keeps you grounded when the stakes feel too big. You rebuild trust by setting boundaries you're actually willing to enforce, not by making threats you'll never follow through on. This is where most people struggle after they've been lied to. You say things like, "I can't deal with this again," or "If this happens one more time, I'm done," but deep down you know you don't mean it, or at least, you're not ready for what done would require. And when you don't follow through, the boundary loses power. The other person learns that your lines are flexible, negotiable, or emotional rather than real. The stakes here are simple but serious. If you don't set boundaries you're prepared to uphold, you accidentally teach the other person how little they need to change. You also slowly teach yourself that your own standards don't matter, which erodes your self-respect every time you bend past your limits. Boundaries work because they're grounded in behavior, not feelings. A feeling says, "I'm hurt." A boundary says, "Here's what happens next time this occurs." A feeling is internal. A boundary is observable. When you set a boundary, you're not trying to control the other person, you're defining the conditions under which you choose to stay connected. This is what the Stoics meant when they spoke about what's within your control. You can't force someone to be honest or consistent, but you can decide what access you give them, how you respond to certain actions, and what you will no longer tolerate. When you shift from emotional warnings to clear consequences, your nervous system relaxes because you're no longer waiting helplessly, you're anchored in your own agency. And that's where trust, if it returns, actually begins, not in their promises, but in your ability to hold your own line. Here's your exact microscript for this part. Here's my boundary, and here's what I'll do if it's crossed. It's not a threat, it's clarity. This sentence is steady and non-reactive. It doesn't try to punish them or guilt them. It simply outlines the truth. It also communicates that you're not using boundaries as emotional weapons, you're using them as structural support for your well-being. Saying it's not a threat, its clarity removes the drama and invites a more adult, grounded conversation. It shows you're not trying to intimidate them, you're being transparent. Picture a real North American moment where this plays out. You're sitting on the couch after work, trying to decompress. They walk in and casually mention something important they didn't tell you earlier, a message from someone you've had issues with, a plan they made without you, a changed story from earlier in the week. You feel your chest tighten. In the past, you would have reacted fast, demanding answers, raising your voice, listing every time they've done this before. Or maybe you would have shut down completely, telling yourself not to seem needy and pushing the discomfort deep inside. But tonight, you do something different. You let the first emotional wave pass, just like you practiced. You take a slow breath, steady yourself, and say, "Here's my boundary, and here's what I'll do if it's crossed. It's not a threat, it's clarity." They pause. They're not used to this version of you. They ask what you mean. You explain calmly, "When something affects us, I expect transparency before the fact, not after. If that doesn't happen, I'll step back and limit emotional conversations until trust is reestablished." You didn't yell. You didn't accuse me. You simply stated the boundary and the consequence. The room feels different. You've shifted the dynamic from chaos and reactivity to structure and accountability. Whether they choose to meet that boundary is up to them, but you've already taken control of your part. Your tiny action today is to define one boundary with one consequence you are genuinely willing to enforce. Not 5 boundaries. Not your whole list of complaints. Just one. And it must meet 3 conditions. It has to be clear, it has to be realistic, and it has to be something you can follow through on even when you're emotional. For example, if communication that directly affects us is hidden again, I'll pause conversations for the rest of the evening and revisit them tomorrow when I'm grounded. Or, if I catch repeated omissions, we'll take a step back from intimacy until trust improves. You're not punishing. You're clarifying. And you're giving yourself a plan so the next time the situation arises, you don't have to guess what to do. Take a slow practice moment here. Sit up a little straighter. Let your shoulders soften. Take a long breath in through your nose, hold it for 3 seconds, and then let it out slowly. Now, say this line quietly, once. It's not a threat, it's clarity. Say it again, a little slower. Let your body feel the difference between control and reactivity. You're not begging them to change. You're anchoring yourself in what you will do, no matter what they choose. The real shift happens when you start acting consistently with your boundaries. Every time you follow through, your nervous system learns that you are capable of protecting your own well-being. That restores self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of rebuilding any other form of trust. If you don't trust yourself to act on your limits, you'll feel unsafe even when the other person is doing the right thing. But when your actions align with your boundaries, something powerful happens. You stop being afraid of losing them because you stop losing yourself. This idea becomes especially important later in the story, when emotions rise, and it would be so easy to fall back into old habits. In that Friday night moment we'll explore soon, this exact sentence becomes the turning point that prevents the conversation from unraveling into chaos. So hold on to it. You'll see how much power it gives you when the pressure is high. You can't rebuild trust if you're constantly monitoring the other person like a security system. That's the claim here, and it hits hard because it's the pattern almost everyone falls into after being lied to. You start checking little details, not because you want to, but because your body feels unsafe. You reread their messages. You watch response times. You study tone shifts. You pay attention to who they follow, who they like, who they text. And for a little while, it feels like this vigilance is helping you stay ahead of pain. But here's the truth, monitoring doesn't rebuild trust, it replaces it. And the stakes are big. If you keep watching them closely enough to catch every potential problem, you'll never relax enough to actually heal. Worse, you'll teach your nervous system that trust only exists when you're in detective mode, and that becomes a prison you build around yourself. Why this matters goes deeper than the relationship itself. Your brain doesn't differentiate between emotional danger and physical danger. When trust breaks, your nervous system goes into a low-level survival state. Hypervigilance becomes your default. That means your mind scans for threats even when there isn't one, and your body reacts to small things as if they're signs of betrayal. You're not overreacting, you're trying to protect yourself. But protection becomes harmful when it turns into constant monitoring. That's why the Stoics emphasized controlling your impressions. You can't stop the first anxious thought, but you can stop feeding it. You do that by shifting from surveillance to boundaries, from investigation to observation of behavior over time. Instead of trying to catch them doing something wrong, you look at consistent patterns. That's how a calmer, more centered version of you operates. You stop chasing proof, and you start living from clarity. Here's your microscript for this section. I'm not going to monitor you, I'm going to watch patterns over time. This line is powerful because it's not an accusation, and it's not a surrender. It tells the other person you're not playing detective, but you're also not ignoring the past. It opens the door to accountability without creating a parent-child dynamic where you're constantly checking their homework. And it grounds you in your own agency. You're observing, not policing. Now picture a scene where this plays out. It's a regular weekday evening. You're both at home getting dinner ready. Their phone buzzes on the counter, and you recognize the name. You would have immediately grabbed the nearest excuse to check the phone, maybe reaching for something next to it, or making a comment, or asking a loaded question like, "Who's that?" with a tone they could feel from across the room. That version of you was coming from fear, not clarity. Tonight, you do something different. You feel the spike of anxiety, you don't pretend it's not there, but you don't let it run the moment. You take a slow breath. You remind yourself of your boundaries from earlier. And then, when the conversation naturally shifts toward weekend plans, and they mention hanging out with friends, you say calmly, "I'm not going to monitor you, I'm going to watch patterns over time." They look at you, a little surprised. They ask what you mean. You explain, "I'm not checking your messages or trying to catch you in something. I'm looking at consistency, how you show up, how you communicate, and whether your actions match your words." The energy in the room changes. Instead of bracing for conflict, they understand the assignment. This is about behavior, not surveillance. And you feel a bit of relief too, because you haven't given in to the urge to investigate. You stayed grounded in yourself. Your tiny action today is to delete one monitoring habit. Not all of them. Just one. It might be checking their location app. It might be rereading old conversations. It might be analyzing social media activity. Choose one behavior that spikes your anxiety and remove it for the next 24 hours. You're not pretending trust is suddenly perfect. You're telling your nervous system you can't rebuild anything while acting like a full-time detective. This isn't about blind trust. It's about breaking a habit that's keeping you stuck. Take a slow practice moment with me. Sit back from your screen a little. Let your jaw unclench. Take one deep breath in, hold it, and let it out slowly. Now repeat the microscript quietly. "I'm not going to monitor you, I'm going to watch patterns over time." Say it again, slower. Feel the difference between control and observation. One is exhausting. The other is grounding. Something important happens once you stop monitoring. You begin to trust your own perception again. Hypervigilance destroys self-trust because you're always trying to confirm or deny what you feel. But when you let go of constant surveillance, you create space for your natural instincts to return, your ability to read tone, to sense sincerity, to notice genuine effort. Instead of scanning for signs of betrayal, your attention shifts toward noticing whether healing is actually happening. You'll start seeing small things you missed before, an apology that feels real, a change in communication, a consistent follow-through, or maybe the opposite, the same old patterns repeating. Either way, you'll be observing reality, not chasing clues. This shift also prepares you for later moments where the emotional stakes rise. When you get to that Friday night scene later in the lesson, the urge to monitor would normally take over. It would push you into suspicion mode, making you react before you think. But because you're learning how to step out of surveillance and into grounded observation, that moment plays out very differently. You'll see how this skill helps you stay calm, clear, and steady, without pretending everything is fine and without policing every detail. For now, remember this: rebuilding trust isn't about catching lies. It's about noticing the truth over time. And the more you practice stepping out of detective mode, the more you open the door for genuine healing, or genuine clarity that it's time to walk away. Either way, you're building a life where your peace isn't dependent on monitoring someone else's phone, tone, or timing. It's dependent on your own alignment with what you will and won't accept. You can't rebuild trust if every difficult conversation turns into an argument about the past. That's the core idea here, and it's one of the biggest places people get stuck. After someone lies to you, almost any disagreement feels connected to that original wound. A small change in tone, a forgotten detail, a delayed message, it all pulls your mind back to the moment you were blindsided. And once the past enters the room, the present conversation becomes impossible. You start talking about what they did months ago instead of what's happening right now. You start listing patterns instead of addressing the moment. And the stakes are huge. If every conflict becomes a trial about the past, trust can't grow. The relationship gets frozen in the worst moment it ever had, and neither of you can move forward because every conversation becomes a battlefield. This matters because your brain is trying to protect you from repeating pain. When trust is broken, your nervous system treats the past as a reference guide for survival. It tells you, don't forget what happened last time, watch for signs, protect yourself before you get hurt again. That instinct isn't wrong, it's trying to help, but it creates a trap. You start responding to the past instead of the present, reacting to echoes instead of the actual person in front of you. The Stoics talked about this when they said you must distinguish what's happening now from the stories your mind brings into the moment. When you stop dragging past wounds into every discussion, you give yourself a small but powerful gift, the ability to see clearly, instead of through the lens of pain. This is how a more grounded version of you behaves. You don't erase the past, but you also don't let it hijack your future. Here's your exact microscript for this part. Let's keep this conversation in the present. We can address the past separately. This line does two critical things. It protects the current moment from becoming overloaded with old emotions, and it still honors the reality that the past matters. It's not denial. It's separation. It gives structure to the discussion so you don't end up fighting about 5 different timelines at once. It also shows you're choosing clarity instead of chaos. Now picture a real-life North American moment where this makes all the difference. You're sitting in the living room, talking about weekend plans, and they suddenly say something that rubs you the wrong way. Maybe they forgot a detail. Maybe they used a phrase that triggers memories of the earlier betrayal. Your body reacts instantly, your chest tightens, your mind races, your tone sharpens. The old version of you would jump straight into the past. This is exactly what you did before. You're hiding something again. I can't trust you because last time you said. Suddenly, the conversation explodes. You're arguing about something that happened months ago, not the actual topic at hand. They get defensive. You get louder. Nobody feels heard. The night is ruined. But today, you try something different. You feel the first emotional spike, but you pause. You take one slow breath to calm the urge to explode. And instead of launching into the past, you say, let's keep this conversation in the present. We can address the past separately. They stop. The tension drops by at least half because you've just taken the fuse out of the emotional bomb. You explain calmly, right now, I want to talk about this moment, not reopen everything that hurt us before. We can talk about that too, just not stacked on top of this. Suddenly, the conversation becomes manageable. You stay on one topic. You get clearer answers. You don't bleed old wounds into new situations. And when you do eventually revisit the past, you're calmer, more structured, and emotionally steady. That's the power of separating moments. Your tiny action today is a simple one-sentence commitment. Choose one current issue in your life and write a sentence that limits the discussion to the present. Something like, tonight, I'm only talking about what happened today, not last month. Or, this conversation stays focused on this situation. You're not denying the past. You're controlling the frame. You're giving yourself a boundary for emotional clarity. Take a slow practice moment here. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Take one steady breath in through your nose, hold it, and let it out slowly. Now say the microscript softly. Let's keep this conversation in the present. Say it again, slower. Feel how it changes your internal state. You're not preparing for battle. You're preparing for clarity. When you learn to separate the past from the present, something powerful shifts inside you. You stop feeling like every disagreement is evidence of betrayal. You stop reacting to small things as if they're signs of another lie. You stop spiraling into emotional flashbacks. Instead, you start responding to what's actually happening. And the other person feels the difference too. They stop bracing every time you begin a conversation. They stop feeling like they're constantly being retried for the same crime. They start showing up more honestly because the emotional stakes don't feel impossible. This doesn't mean the past disappears. It doesn't mean you trust blindly. It just means you're putting conversations where they belong. Think of it like sorting papers into folders instead of throwing everything in a single box. When everything is mixed together, you can't find solutions. When things are separated, you can actually deal with them. This skill becomes incredibly important later, especially in the Friday night moment we'll walk through in the story. That moment could easily collapse under the weight of old wounds. One person says something slightly wrong, and suddenly both of you are drowning in history. But because you're learning how to separate present conversations from past pain, that moment takes a completely different turn. You'll see how this one line, this one simple separation, keeps you grounded and prevents a normal argument from turning into a repeat of the worst night of your relationship. For now, remember this: trust isn't rebuilt by reliving the past. It's rebuilt by handling the present with clarity. And when you learn how to do that, you give yourself the chance to heal in real time instead of staying stuck in what already happened. You can't rebuild trust if your self-worth depends on whether the other person is acting right today. That's the heart of this section, and it cuts deep because most people don't realize they're doing it. After someone lies to you, you start tying your emotional stability to their behavior. If they're consistent, you relax a little. If they slip, your whole body tightens. If they're affectionate, you feel hopeful. If they're distant, you feel rejected. Your mood rises and falls with their choices. And the stakes here are enormous. If your sense of value depends on how someone else behaves, you'll always feel off balance. You'll never feel secure enough to see clearly, make decisions calmly, or hold boundaries consistently. Rebuilding trust from that position becomes nearly impossible because you're rebuilding from a place of dependency instead of strength. This matters because your nervous system is looking for reassurance more than truth. When trust is broken, your brain tries to regulate itself by reading cues from the other person. If they seem loving, your body relaxes. If they seem uncertain, your body panics. It's survival logic, not weakness. But it creates a dangerous pattern. You stop being guided by your own internal compass, and you start letting their behavior dictate how you feel about yourself and the relationship. The Stoics warned about giving other people too much power over your inner state. When you anchor your worth internally, not based on compliments, not based on reassurance, not based on their emotional availability, you become more stable. And when you're stable, you can assess trust objectively instead of through the fog of insecurity. You stop asking, "Do they still care about me?" and start asking, "Is this relationship actually healthy for me?" Here's your exact microscript for this part. My worth isn't up for negotiation, even while we rebuild trust. This line is grounding because it reminds both you and the other person that your value does not fluctuate with their behavior. It doesn't excuse their past actions, and it doesn't pretend trust isn't shaken. It simply puts your identity back in your hands. When you say this line, out loud or internally, you snap out of the pattern of overpersonalizing everything they do. You stop interpreting every mood shift as a referendum on your worth. Now imagine a North American moment where this matters. You and your partner are getting ready for bed. It's been a long day. Earlier, something small bothered you. Maybe they forgot to send a message when they changed plans, or maybe they seemed distant during dinner. Before the trust break, you would have brushed it off. But now, your mind connects every small shift to the fear that they're hiding something again. You climb into bed with your thoughts running, heart beating fast, and stomach tightening. You look at them to feel reassured, but they're scrolling their phone, tired, not thinking about any of this. The old version of you would assume the worst. They don't care, they're pulling away again, something's wrong. You'd either shut down or start an argument, not because of what happened tonight, but because of what the past taught you to expect. Tonight, you choose a different pattern. You pause. You breathe. You remind yourself, my worth isn't up for negotiation, even while we rebuild trust. You repeat it quietly, letting the words soften the intensity in your body. Instead of seeking reassurance from their behavior, you anchor yourself. Then, if you still need to address something, you approach it from clarity instead of panic. You say, I noticed something earlier, and I want to talk about it when we're both awake tomorrow. I'm not assuming the worst, I just want clarity. They look up, surprised, because your tone is calm, not accusatory. You didn't spiral, and you didn't swallow your feelings. You held your worth steady and approached the moment with confidence. That shift changes everything. You're not coming from fear anymore. You're coming from self-respect. Your tiny action today is this: write your worth statement somewhere you'll see it, a note on your phone, a sentence inside your calendar, or a line you can say in the mirror before a difficult conversation. The statement is simple: my worth is stable, even when my trust isn't. That's your reminder. You're separating two things that often get tangled together. Trust may be shaky right now, but that does not make you shaky as a person. Take a slow practice moment with me here. Shift your weight so your body is comfortable. Release your shoulders. Take a long, steady breath in, hold it, and exhale slowly. Now say, quietly, once, my worth isn't up for negotiation. Say it again, slower, letting your body take it in. Notice how your chest loosens slightly. That's the moment your nervous system starts to relearn that your stability doesn't depend on someone else's good day or bad day. When you separate your worth from their behavior, you unlock something powerful. You start seeing the truth more clearly because you're not filtering everything through the fear of losing them. You're not measuring your value by whether they remember to text you back or whether they're affectionate tonight. You stop expecting their behavior to fix your insecurity, and you start building confidence from your own internal structure. And when you do that, trust, if it's going to be rebuilt, can grow on a much healthier foundation. You're not rebuilding from desperation. You're rebuilding from dignity. This shift becomes critical in the upcoming story moment, the Friday night conversation we've been leading toward. That moment is emotionally charged, and it would be easy to fall into old patterns, taking their tone personally, reading their frustration as rejection, and letting fear take control. But because you're learning to stabilize your self-worth, the entire way you handle that moment changes. You'll see exactly how this one internal shift stops you from collapsing into self-doubt and helps you stay grounded even when the conversation gets tense. Remember this, trust can be rebuilt between two people, but self-worth must be rebuilt inside one person, you. The relationship might heal. It might not. But you, your value, your steadiness, your clarity, that's yours to strengthen no matter what. You can't rebuild trust if you keep asking the other person to manage your anxiety for you. That's the core idea here, and it's one of the most misunderstood parts of healing after a betrayal. When someone has lied to you, you naturally want reassurance, regularly, clearly, repeatedly. At first, that reassurance feels like medicine. It calms your nervous system for a moment. It quiets the spinning thoughts. It gives you a little relief. But over time, it becomes a trap. You start depending on their words to regulate your emotions. You start feeling unsafe until they say the right thing. You may even find yourself testing them, asking questions you already know the answer to, seeking validation in the same loops, checking if they'll react the right way. And the stakes are huge. If your emotional stability depends on their reassurance, trust never actually rebuilds. It only stretches as far as their last comforting sentence. One bad mood, one tired response, one imperfect moment, and you crash all over again. Why this happens makes sense from a psychological and a physiological standpoint. When trust breaks, your brain loses its sense of predictability. Predictability is how your nervous system feels safe. So when the pattern is disrupted, the body goes into alert mode. It keeps asking, are we safe now? Now? How about now? And because it's too exhausting to self-soothe constantly, you start outsourcing that regulation to the other person. The Stoics understood the danger of relying on external factors for internal calm. Their message wasn't that you shouldn't feel anything, it was that your grounding must come from your own choices, not someone else's behavior. When you learn to soothe your own anxiety, even a little, you stop turning your partner into your emotional emergency kit. That shift doesn't just help you, it gives the relationship a chance to breathe. You stop treating every conversation as proof of safety or danger, and you start seeing things more objectively. Here's your exact microscript for this part. I'm working on calming myself first. I don't want to put all my anxiety on you. This line is powerful because it takes responsibility without blaming. It doesn't say, you made me anxious, even if their past actions contributed to it. It says, I'm managing my part of the process. That creates space. It removes pressure from them while also signaling maturity and intention. It tells them you're not expecting them to constantly soothe you, but you still value communication. Now picture how this plays out in a real North American moment. You're at your desk, wrapping up work. They mention they're going out with coworkers after their shift. It should be a normal conversation, but your mind immediately jumps, who's going? Why didn't they mention this earlier? Why did their tone sound a little off? Before the trust break, this wouldn't have rattled you. But now, the old fear wakes up fast, and before you know it, you're on the edge of spiraling. The old version of you would text things like, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Or, "Are you sure there's nothing else going on?" Not because you want to interrogate them, but because you need reassurance. You're trying to quiet the anxiety in your body. Today, you slow down. You recognize the spike in fear, but you don't act on it immediately. You take one long breath and acknowledge what's happening. My anxiety is talking louder than the situation. Then you speak or text the line, "I'm working on calming myself first. I don't want to put all my anxiety on you." They pause, and their reaction shifts. Instead of feeling accused or trapped, they understand what's going on and respond gently because the pressure isn't all on them to fix your emotional state. And because you didn't start with suspicion or interrogation, the conversation stays calm. Later, when you're less activated, you can ask any real questions you have from a grounded place rather than fear. Your tiny action today is to practice one self-soothing technique before you ask for reassurance. Just one. It could be a slow breath. It could be stepping out of the room for a minute. It could be writing down the exact fear in one sentence instead of letting it swirl in your head. The rule is simple: regulate first, communicate second. You're not forbidding yourself from ever seeking reassurance. You're just changing the order. That one shift can save you from spiraling and can save the other person from feeling overwhelmed. Take a slow practice moment right now. Sit comfortably. Place one hand on your chest or your stomach, wherever the anxiety tends to show up. Take a long breath in through your nose, hold for 2 seconds, exhale slowly. Whisper the microscript once, "I'm working on calming myself first." Say it again, slower, and notice how your body responds. You're telling your nervous system it doesn't need to sprint toward reassurance to survive. You're building internal predictability again. Something powerful happens when you take ownership of regulating your own anxiety. You stop interrogating the other person as a way of soothing yourself. You stop reading into pauses or delayed replies as signs of danger. You stop needing them to constantly prove something to you. Instead, you observe. You listen. You evaluate based on reality, not panic. And trust, if it returns, will return on the basis of consistent behavior, not constant reassurance. This shift becomes especially important when we move into the Friday night scene later, the one we've been circling throughout this lesson. That moment is emotionally charged. There will be tension, old fears, and the potential for misunderstanding. But because you're learning how to regulate first, communicate second, you'll be able to respond with clarity instead of letting anxiety hijack the conversation. You'll see how one deep breath and one sentence changes the entire tone, how it stops the situation from spiraling and gives you control of the moment again. For now, remember this: reassurance can support healing, but it can't do the healing for you. The real rebuild happens when you reclaim your emotional steadiness, step by step, and stop outsourcing your calm to someone else's behavior. That's where true trust, whether in them or in yourself, begins. You're driving home on a Friday night, the sun already down, and your mind replaying the same worry that's been creeping in all week. You and your partner agreed to talk tonight, really talk, after a small miscommunication earlier that stirred up old fears. You're not angry, but you're tense. Your chest feels tight. Your thoughts keep drifting toward the worst-case version of the story. By the time you pull into the driveway, you already know how this would have gone in the past: raised voices, accusations, spirals, exhaustion. Tonight needs to be different. You've spent this whole lesson building tools for this exact moment. You step into the house and find them at the kitchen table, waiting. There's that familiar nervous energy between you, the kind that used to ignite into conflict before either of you even said a word. They start talking first. They explain again what happened earlier that week, why they didn't tell you about a last-minute planned shift, why their tone sounded off, how nothing suspicious was happening. And as they talk, something inside you tightens. This is the moment you warned yourself about. The moment where the first emotional wave hits hard. The moment where you'd normally jump straight into detective mode, watching every detail, waiting to catch something inconsistent. Your body reacts instantly. Your stomach drops. Your breath gets shallow. The story starts to blur with every time you've been lied to before. The past rushes forward like it wants to sit in the middle of the conversation. But this time, you catch it. You remember section 3, the line you practiced. You inhale slowly, exhale even slower, and say quietly, "Give me a moment, my reaction is loud, but I want to respond clearly." Their shoulders soften a bit because they've seen the old version of this moment. They've seen you explode, collapse, or shut down. This is different. You sit down across from them and listen again, this time with your breath steady. They finish explaining, and there's a pause, one of those heavy ones that usually turns into a fight. You feel the impulse to bring up the past, to list the patterns, to connect this moment to everything that ever hurt you. But section 6 comes back to you. You remember the separation you've been practicing. You say, "Let's keep this conversation in the present, we can address the past separately." That one line removes half the pressure in the room. You're no longer juggling every betrayal at once. You're dealing with tonight. They nod slowly, looking almost relieved, because keeping everything in one conversation always overwhelmed both of you. You take another slow breath, grounding yourself. And then the next challenge shows up, the pull toward reassurance. The urge to ask unnecessary questions just to feel safe. The desire for them to say the perfect thing. You recognize the anxiety rising, but you don't let it steer the moment. Section 8 clicks into place. Before you say anything else, you steady your voice and say, "I'm working on calming myself first. I don't want to put all my anxiety on you." Their faces soften. The defensiveness that usually blocks communication never arrives. You didn't accuse me. You didn't interrogate. You owned your part of the emotional process. That changes the tone instantly. They reach for your hand, and for the first time in a long time, you can actually feel the difference between fear and reality. You're not reacting to the past anymore. You're responding to the present. You take one more breath, remembering the line from section 4, the one about boundaries. You're calm now, steady enough to speak without shaking. You say, "Here's my boundary, and here's what I'll do if it's crossed." It's not a threat, it's clarity. You explain simply, you need transparency when plans change, especially if it involves people connected to past hurt. Not endless updates. Not surveillance. Just clarity before the fact, not after. And you explain the consequence, not punishment, not control, just structure. If communication breaks down again, you'll pause emotionally charged conversations until you're grounded. They nod again. This isn't a fight. It's a framework. You continue talking, both of you calmer now. You watch their reactions, not from suspicion, but from observation. You remember section 5, "I'm not going to monitor you, I'm going to watch patterns over time." And that's exactly how this moment feels. You're not looking for clues. You're looking for consistency. There's a moment in the conversation where the old reaction almost takes over. They say something clumsy, something that hits a bruise you didn't expect. You feel the emotional spike, sharp and sudden. The old version of you would have snapped or shut down. But this time, you pause. You take 3 slow breaths. You say softly, almost to yourself, "My worth isn't up for negotiation, even while we rebuild trust." And just like that, the panic loses its grip. You're steady enough to hear the real meaning behind their words, not just the fear-based interpretation. The turning point arrives quietly. They apologize, not the defensive kind, not the rushed kind, but a real apology. A calm one. A clear one. And because you've slowed yourself down, you can actually receive it instead of filtering it through suspicion. By the time the conversation ends, nothing magical has happened. Trust isn't fully restored. All the pain isn't gone. But something important has shifted. For the first time in a long time, the two of you talked through a hard moment without spiraling. You didn't become a detective. You didn't collapse into fear. You didn't drag the entire past into one conversation. You didn't ask them to rescue you from your anxiety. You didn't abandon your boundaries to keep the peace. You stayed steady enough to respond intentionally. When you go to bed that night, you notice something small but real: your breathing is easier. Your mind isn't racing. You're not replaying the conversation in your head, trying to decode it. You feel tired, yes, but not emotionally wrecked. You fall asleep without the usual pit in your stomach. The outcome isn't perfection. It's control. It's clarity. It's a calmer evening, a safer body, a night that ends without another emotional storm. That's what rebuilding trust looks like, small turning points where the old story almost wins but doesn't. What this whole lesson has really been about is shifting from reacting out of old wounds to responding from grounded clarity. Not pretending the hurt didn't happen, not forcing trust to return overnight, but learning to rebuild, or walk away, without losing yourself. When trust breaks, your nervous system goes into survival mode. This lesson has been about giving you tools that return you to yourself, so you can choose instead of collapse, respond instead of spiral, and move with intention instead of fear. First, we opened with the real pain, the disorientation, the overthinking, the way your mind keeps replaying old betrayals whenever something feels even slightly off. Then we broke down how trust isn't rebuilt through reassurance, it's rebuilt through clarity, one specific expectation at a time. Next, we focused on slowing your first reaction so you don't confuse old fear with current reality, giving your body room to settle before you respond. After that, you learned how boundaries become real only when you're prepared to follow through, not when you're using them as emotional warnings. You saw how stepping out of detective mode and watching patterns over time creates space for actual healing rather than constant surveillance. Then we explored how holding your self-worth steady prevents you from measuring your value through someone else's behavior. And after that, we looked at how managing your own anxiety first keeps you from pushing emotional pressure onto the other person. Finally, we wove all of these together inside the Friday night story, where you stayed rooted, calm, and intentional through a moment that would have once spiraled into chaos. Here are 3 do-today steps to anchor the work you've just done. First, choose one tiny clarity expectation you want to establish, something measurable and specific, and write it in one simple sentence. That small clarity shift will help lower your anxiety because it gives your mind something solid to rest on. Next, practice your pause one time today before replying to anything emotionally loaded. Use the sentence, "My reaction is loud, but I want to respond clearly." That one pause can change the entire tone of a conversation. And finally, pick one monitoring habit, just one, and turn it off for the next 24 hours. That act alone starts teaching your nervous system that trust can't grow in a surveillance state. If this resonated, the next natural step for you is exploring how to rebuild emotional safety when both partners feel misunderstood. That's the lesson where we look at miscommunication loops, emotional triggers, and the ways 2 people can unintentionally make each other less secure. A great follow-up episode would be something like, Emotional Safety, How to Stop Miscommunication Before It Turns into Distance. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships, this is what we do here every week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.